Atse, papastem si kason. Uh, so we're continuing to process this mousse that we were gifted with. And the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you how we traditionally, how we were taught to make pantawan, to make this into dry meat. Now, what we've taken, the easiest pieces to make into pantawan is taking from the hind quarter mainly, and those are those like those inside rounds, those outside rounds, and like the tri-tip, all of those bigger chunks are nice to make into dry meat. Because when we're cutting dry meat, what makes it easier for us as dry meat cutters is we look at the grain of the meat, and you could see the lines on the meat. That's the grain of the meat. So when we're making it into pantawan or large dry meat strips, that's going to be our guide as those lines, the grain, following the grain of the meat. Now, one of the biggest things when you're cutting dry meat, a very sharp knife, and a larger knife is better. Just because if you have a short knife, it's going to be really hard with the like a short knife, and your cuts are going to be really small, and you're probably going to end up having holes, and it's going to fall apart on you. Whereas with a larger knife, you can make big, slow cuts. One thing I will stress that because these knives are really large and they're really super sharp, you've got to be very careful. As dry meat makers, we're so used to cutting our dry meat, we trust our knives, we trust our hands, we trust our knives, and we use our feel a lot. So when we're cutting very near our hands, but we very rarely cut into our hands. But that's what we use as sort of feeling with the knife and with our hand. So with a chunk like this, the larger chunks with a larger grain, what I usually do and what I was taught is to just cut the ends straight because that's going to sort of guide you when you're making your dry meat. If you leave it, say, with a kind of a pointed edge on it, it's going to kind of mess you up when you're making your dry meat because you're going to be following that line and using each side as your guide. And I do that to each side just to make a nice straight line for myself to follow. Any pieces like this, we're going to be throwing into the grinder. So again, nothing getting wasted. When I was first taught how to cut dry meat, first thing I was told to do is cut down the center, right in the center of your dry meat. And you're not cutting all the way through, so you're carefully cutting, and you're just going to maybe within like a quarter of an inch. So just a tiny, you want your dry meat to be about a quarter of an inch wide. Any wider than that, it's going to take a long time to dry. It's going to be hard to dry. So I've made that first cut down the center, and I've made it about a quarter of an inch. Now, when I was taught to make dry meat, I was told to hang it over the edge of a table or something because I'm putting my hand on the back so that I could feel my fingers are, you could maybe see my finger sort of poking right here. And I've got the back side of the knife, but you can see that, and I could feel how thick the meat is. So I'm just going to cut carefully, not touching my fingers until I get started, so that this chunk will hang over the table without falling off. And I'm just carefully using my finger to feel when that knife edge is coming close. But you can see that you could sort of see the sun through there. That's how close I've come to my fingers in there. So you could sort of see the light through there. That's as far as I want to go. Now I'm going to start. We were told to unroll it. So I've got my hand flat in the bottom. I'm placing it on top. And I'm just taking the knife and cutting close to my hand, the flat part of my hand, but not cutting through so that I hit my hand. And it's a slow process when you're first learning because you're just a little nervous about the knife, and that's fine. It takes a while until to get proficient at it. But now that I've cut that first part, you can see here that this is going to stay up here. This is just gravity is going to pull it down. So it's going to help me. I'm following the grain of the meat. My hand is in the back, acting as a guide, and I'm just cutting. For me, I like to cut away from myself because I could make longer cuts and use my hand as that guide in the back. So again, my hand is in the back. You can see my fingers kind of going in the back there, but I'm just going close, but not touching my fingers. And I could feel from the back of the meat there how close where I should stop. And I'm just going to keep going. And you can just make little cuts even and just take your time. Or once you get a little better at it, you can just use your hand and make larger cuts. But we were told we're just unraveling the meat is what we're told. So you can see all of the grains are all going this way, and I'm just letting gravity help me. Unraveling the meat. Being careful with my hand in the back not to cut close or cut through the meat where my hand is, and keeping it as even thickness throughout as I can. And when it gets too low like that, I just roll it onto itself, start back near the top, and I'm just going to continue to unravel this meat. When you first start out, you might get a lot of holes in there and it might look a little mangled, and that's fine. It takes years of practice to be able to cut dry meat quickly. Now with myself, it usually doesn't take long because when I'm not showing somebody how, I can usually focus really well on what I'm doing and just unroll the meat into a nice long strip. And again, you got to have a really sharp knife, but you got to really trust yourself with a knife. Again, I just roll it back onto itself. My hand is always at the back there, acting as my guide. Have I ever cut myself? Oh, you bet I have. Many, many times when I was first learning. Do I still cut myself? Every now and then, yes. When I'm rushing or not being careful with my knife. It's just something that comes with making dry meat. So you see, I've nearly got it all strung out here now to an even thickness throughout on this side. I'm just finishing up this any little thicker pieces. I'm going to make one more pass through those just to thin them out a little more, just so the meat can quickly dry and get that smoke throughout it. So I've pretty much finished this side. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it around. I'm going to roll this because that's going to be my counterweight holding it. And I'm going to level it out, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Again, hand in the back, following that grain of the meat, and just sort of letting gravity pull it down and unroll it for me. Continue to go through, unrolling it. And until I'm done, almost done. Again, roll it back up to the top. Hand is still behind, and I'm still unraveling it, following that grain carefully. And you'll see mainly I'm using the either the tip or the back of the knife. I don't really use the middle because it's easier for me to feel with my hand either that tip, the top part of the knife, or the back of the knife. So again, roll it back up until I'm nearer to the top of the table. Again, gravity is helping me, cutting along those meat grains, trying to keep it as even as possible. Takes a lot of practice, and it took me many years before I can finally get a piece of pansawan or the flat meat like this without a bunch of holes in it. Because when I first started, there was holes all throughout where I was cutting through and not being careful, and I'd end up with holes everywhere. In fact, a funny story, when I first started cutting dry meat with my kohkom and my mom, they were showing me how, and they were giving me smaller pieces. But I guess I was a pretty good dry meat cutter, because I had dry meat that sort of looked like this with very little holes, and I was watching them and I could see that theirs had a bunch of holes. So what I did is I looked at mine, it didn't look like theirs, so I started cutting holes in it. And my kokum and my mom said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm making it look like yours." And they said, "It's not supposed to look like this. Yours is the way it's supposed to look." So see, now I finished unrolling that chunk of dry meat. You could see that how large that chunk turned into. So now I'm going to hang this on the rack beside the other ones, spread it out the way those ones are, and continue to let this smoke and dry. So I want it completely spread out. I'm going to hang it right over because it is a larger piece. Now with the dry meat on here, what's going to happen is we're going to let them dry. These ones have been on for a while now, so we're going to let them until they get a little bit darker, and then we're going to turn them over. Because if you see here, you can see where it was sitting on the wood here, on the racks, where it's not dry. So we turn them over to let smoke get on that side, and to make sure that these parts that were sitting against here will get smoked as well. We put them as close as possible because we're going to be hopefully filling up this rack. And once we start running out of room, we'll even hang them individually on each one of these poles. But before we get into cutting any further, for anybody just starting out, I just wanted to show you a bit of an easier way if you wanted to begin learning how to make pansawan. Now what I've got here is a jerky board, and you could pick these up in your outdoor or hunting supplier stores. Cabela's is a good place to get them. But they've got these boards. Some of them, they're different sizes, but this is the standard size jerky board, and they use them for cutting beef jerky and stuff like that. But you'll see the thickness on one side is a little thicker. It's about 1/4 inch. And that's about how thick we were cutting our dry meat. The other side is even smaller, less than 1/4 inch. It's really narrower and then makes thinner jerky. It's good for jerky if you're smoking on a charcoal smoker. For dry meat, we want to use that thicker side where it's about 1/4 of an inch. But I'm going to take, even though I've got a larger, you can see the meat is larger, I want to be cutting again with the grain of the meat sitting this way on my board, so that when I cut it, it's going to cut along the grain, because remember, I want to be cutting on the grain. So what I'm going to do with this chunk is I'm going to cut it in half. First, I'm going to do the same thing that I did with my last dry meat. Cut off those ends for the grind again. Kind of even it out. And then this one I'm going to cut right in half. So you'll see the grains of the meat here. They're going this way. So I'm going to be cutting this dry meat this way. And when I'm doing it on a board like this, when you're doing jerky, you'd normally just cut it through, and you'll just have a little piece about that wide to throw on your smoker. But for us, we're going to do it almost like a dry meat, the way I was cutting, where we're going to unroll this. So I'm just trying to face it the best way for you to see. I'm starting at the front up here, taking my knife, pressing down so I know that it's cutting through, very carefully going almost to the end on both sides. Again, carefully, and I'm going to flip it, and I'm going to cut it again along my jerky board, using that as a guide. And I'm just going to keep turning this and letting that meat unravel. Once I get near the end, I'm going to pull it back, and I'm going to start again from the other side. Maybe pull it a little further in, and I'm just going to keep unraveling it and rolling it as I'm cutting. So I'm just watching carefully both sides so I get them even. Roll it, stop, roll it carefully, just rolling it out along that grain. And again, I'll pull it back and watching my knife on the other end, unrolling it, get to the edge on this side, and I'm going to cut to the edge on that side, roll it out, and continue. This is a good way for somebody just starting out, because you're nowhere near your hands and you're far less danger of cutting yourself, and you've got that guide. So you see, I've got another strip of nice pansawan, and you could see the sun shining through that piece. So that one's good for the smoker as well. So those are two ways to cut your dry meat for the smoker, and we've put them on the smoker. They're smoking under there. Once we've got this rack full, we're probably going to put a tarp or something around it just to hold that smoke in there, because we've got a little bit of wind, and you could see my smoke is sort of blowing away from the meat. So we're just going to put a tarp around it so that smoke goes evenly throughout. But we're going to continue cutting here until we've got it all on our smoker. And once we've got it all on the smoker, we'll show you how that looks. But hopefully you were able to see the way I was cutting with both the traditional way and then with the jerky board as assistance. So that's how we make pansawan in preparation to make kahiwak. Simaga.